All right, let's get straight to it. Welcome to this Code Ninja Security Advisory. We've got a critical, real-time alert on the wire today regarding a severe vulnerability baked right into the Apple ecosystem. We're talking about CVE 2026-43654. As defenders, you know we're constantly watching the perimeter, and trust me, this is a threat that requires your immediate, undivided attention. We're going to break down the raw intelligence straight from the National Vulnerability Database and Sentinel-1, so we know exactly what we're up against.
So what exactly is the nature of this beast? Well, CVE 2026-43654 is a critical kernel memory disclosure flaw. Now, what does that actually mean for us out in the field? It means a locally installed, completely unprivileged application can just silently read regions of kernel memory that should be strictly off-limits to user space. It's essentially a fundamental breakdown of the core barriers designed to keep the operating system isolated from the everyday apps running on top of it.
Let's take a quick look at the timeline here, because this thing moved incredibly fast. On May 11th, the vulnerability was officially received from Apple and hit the NVD. Literally 3 days later, by May 14th, CISA ADP and NIST had already wrapped their initial analysis and stamped it with severity metrics. And then, boom, just 4 days after that, on May 18th, Sentinel-1 dropped a deep-dive technical report mapping out the impact and mitigations. This rapid-fire sequence of disclosures, it tells us the security community is treating this as an absolute top-tier, high-priority event.
Now, our operational objective for this briefing is straightforward and completely uncompromising. We are deploying this intel directly to you to force immediate mitigation behaviors across your entire perimeter. The whole goal here is to accelerate your vendor patch deployment cycle and slam that window of exposure shut way before threat actors can operationalize this exploit chain at scale. We've got to move faster than they do.
Actually, I'm going to pause the tactical data stream for just a second here to run a brief intentional communication check. Look, in our line of work, knowing you have a fully secure, reliable link to your threat intelligence is absolutely vital. So I have to ask, is this comms link secure? Are you receiving this data loud and clear?
To actively secure this link and make sure you're getting these real-time intel drops the exact second they happen, you need to subscribe to @cybertech79 and enable those notifications. Consider it a strict security necessity for real-time intelligence gathering. I'm also going to need you to hit that like button right now to formally acknowledge receipt of this intel. All right, protocol executed. Let's get back into the analysis.
Okay, let's map out the blast radius on this thing. CISA ADP has sized up this threat and handed it a CVS 3.1 base score of 7.5. That categorizes it as a high-severity vulnerability. Now, you might be thinking, well, it doesn't immediately grant full remote code execution all on its own, and that's true. But its ability to silently leak highly privileged data makes it a dangerously effective, critical building block in an attacker's exploit chain.
And the roster of compromised Apple operating systems is honestly massive. On the mobile front, if you're running iOS or iPadOS versions prior to 18.7.9 or 26.5, you are exposed, period. For the desktop environments, if you're on macOS, the exposure covers Sequoia prior to 15.7.7, Sonoma prior to 14.8.7, and Taheo prior to 26.5. This exposure literally cascades all the way down to Apple tvOS, visionOS, and watchOS prior to version 26.5. We're looking at a cross-platform architectural flaw here, guys.
So, why is this specific memory leak so incredibly dangerous? Well, it comes down to KASLR. Kernel Address Space Layout Randomization. Apple relies heavily on KASLR to protect the kernel by randomizing the memory layout, which usually makes it a nightmare for an attacker to find sensitive functions. But this vulnerability, it completely defeats KASLR. By leaking that kernel memory, the attacker basically gets handed a pristine map of the system. They can see exposed pointers, cryptographic keys, system structures, the whole shebang. It essentially rolls out the red carpet for follow-on privilege escalation.
If we dig down into the root cause, it lands squarely under the CWE 497 classification, which is exposure of sensitive system information to an unauthorized control sphere. Basically, the original code paths in these OS builds just did a terrible job of handling memory during user space interactions. They completely failed to initialize, bound, or sanitize memory regions before handing data back down to the user level, and the result? A silent, continuous leak of critical system state.
So how are they going to strike? The primary attack vector here requires the adversary to run code locally on your target device, typically by tricking a user into running a malicious or compromised app. For your defense and hunt teams, your specific indicators of compromise, your IOCs, are going to be sitting right in your mobile device management telemetry. You need to be hunting for any unexpected applications that are making frequent or highly anomalous kernel API calls. And obviously, you absolutely must be actively hunting down devices running those outdated OS builds we just talked about, like anything sitting below iOS 18.7.9.
All right, that brings us to Section 12, Critical Mitigation Protocol, Securing the Perimeter. Let's talk about how we actually lock this down.
I'm issuing 3 absolute non-negotiable patching directives for your teams. Step 1, you've got to update all operating systems to those 18.7.9 or 26.5 baselines right now. Step 2, enforce these minimum versions strictly through your MDM compliance policies and be aggressive about blocking any non-compliant devices from touching your sensitive network resources. Step 3, audit your installed applications across the board. Rip out any untrusted third-party software and restrict all installations to fully vetted App Store sources.
And I really want to be absolutely clear on this next point because it is crucial. There is no magic vendor-provided workaround for CVE 2026-43654. You can't just flip a configuration switch or arbitrarily close a port and expect this to go away. Deploying Apple's fixed builds, actual physical patching, is the one and only complete viable remediation here. Whatever you do, do not delay your deployment schedules for this one.
You might be wondering why we're pushing this briefing out so aggressively. It's because, as White Hat researchers, we operate strictly under the ethos of coordinated vulnerability disclosure. The core belief is simple. Users absolutely must know the vulnerabilities in their own systems so they can actually protect them. We operate out in the open, we share the raw intel, and we force the fixes to happen. Because relying on security through obscurity, yeah, that always fails. The only real way we secure the perimeter is by knowing exactly where the holes are and patching them together.
The intelligence has been delivered, the mitigation protocol is crystal clear. Now the ball is in your court to execute. Audit your fleets, deploy those patches, and keep a very close eye on your telemetry. The exploit is out there in the wild right now, so the only real question left is exactly how fast can your team close the window before someone climbs through it? Think about that. Until the next advisory, stay secure.